Hello, everyone. Welcome to Avaya's Healthy Aging Curriculum. I am Andy Anderson. My partner, Ike Allen, and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of Avaya University. Avaya is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. And thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Judy Foreman, is here today to talk with you about exercise and aging. Judy is an author of several books. She was a staff writer at the Boston Globe for more than 23 years. And a health columnist for many of those years. She has been a lecturer on medicine at Harvard Medical School. She has hosted a weekly radio show and has won more than 50 journalism awards. Thank you so much for being here with us, Judy.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Absolutely. And there was many other things I could have said about you because you are a very accomplished woman. And I really appreciate you being here to chat with us today. So let's dive into this topic of aging. Why don't we start with what is aging to you?
Aging is very relevant to me, but actually to everybody too. It's actually one of the biggest mysteries in the universe. I mean, we all think of it personally like, oh my God, I'm getting old. But to an evolutionary biologist, it's really one of the most fascinating things, partly because not all creatures age. Like sea urchins, for instance, they don't age. They're the same age molecularly, cellularly at any point over X number of years. We unfortunately do age, but it's not really inevitable because we know now biologically not every creature ages. So we think of it as something that's kind of dooming us, but it's not quite that bad.
So if a creature doesn't age, they obviously eventually die, but they just don't go through a process of aging?
Right, and that's sort of the goal, if you will, for people. Demographers call it squaring the curve. I wish I had my slides to show you, but right now we kind of live along, and as the years go by, we get more and more disabilities and dysfunctions and diseases, and it's a long period of what they call morbidity, sickness, yuckiness. But the idea is to stay really healthy, to increase the health span, and then drop dead.
Right.
Without having a long period of misery.
Right.
And exercise is one of which I'm sure we'll get to. Is one of the main ways you can kind of square this curve, live a longer, healthier life, and then not a long period of decline, and then die relatively okay.
Yeah, that sounds like the dream for all of us. I love it. So going back to we'll definitely dive into exercise. And I also just kind of want to talk a little bit more about this like process of aging. So, right, why is it that some species will like live past the age of reproduction, right? They've had their babies and they continue living on and on like us, right? We live for decades beyond reproduction versus, just passing on your genes and we're out the door.
Exactly. Why not just pass on your genes and die? And that's a really good question. It's kind of a mystery, but one of the theories is what I'm sure you've heard of called the grandmother effect. Postmenopausal females in humans and also whales and elephants seem to be a benefit for the whole species or the whole family. And in the animal kingdom, that's because these older matriarchs kind of know where old, long forgotten water holes are or food supplies. So by having that knowledge, they can pass it on to their children and their children's children. So you're actually propelling your own genes down the line by helping to raise your grandchild. And if you have time, there's a very interesting story about this that I observed firsthand. Back when I was a medical writer for the Globe, an epidemic broke out among the Navajo Indians in New Mexico. And journalists unfortunately called it the Navajo flu. But what it really was an epidemic of the hantavirus, H-A-N-T-A. And people in the Navajo Nation were just having horrible lung infections and pneumonia and dying. And the doctors in the health department at New Mexico and also the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, put their heads together and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And they had the good sense to contact the Navajo elders, essentially the grandfathers. And the the elders, remembered that twice before in the 20th century, they had seen an outbreak like this, and they had noticed that it went along with excess rainfall, which led to a bumper crop of pine nuts, which led to a bumper crop of deer mice, which led to a bumper crop of deer mouse poop, which got aerosolized and breathed in by the people, and that was the trigger of the epidemic. But if the scientists hadn't talked to the Navajo elders, they might not have cracked this case. So it's a really clear example, even in humans, of the value of older people around.
Right. Oh, I love that. That's an
Isn't that cool?
awesome story. Not great for everyone who suffered from that, but awesome story in the world of, yeah, how it all ties together. So, this is kind of like an age-old question, right? Like what, is it our nature versus nurture, right? Is it our genes, or is it the environment that determines, right, how long we're going to live?
That's a perfect question. That's sort of the essence of everything. It's both genes and the environment. If you grow up in an unsafe environment, you might not even make it to reproductive age. I mean, the odds are against you. Like you have prey in form of other animals. Now we have prey in predators in the case of bullets or cars or diseases. A safe environment is essential to people living long enough to reproduce. And actually, if you live, the older you are at the age of reproduction, the more likely it is you have good genes to start with, and then you're passing those genes on too. And in fact, we can see with humans, we basically have a safer environment than we had like 100 years ago. And the age at which a woman gives birth to her first child is going up very noticeably.
Yeah.
One side little note here on life expectancy is in the last 2 or 3 years, life expectancy has been going down among Americans because our environment is a bit less safe, partly because of the opioid epidemic and guns and diseases of despair like suicide. So it's a flexible thing, but overall the big picture is our environment is safer. But the genetic part of everything is really important too. There are a lot of studies in centenarians, those are people over 100, and they have genetic profiles that are very favorable to longer life. And it's a very noticeable thing. And in animal studies, in little worms called C. elegans and in flies, the genetic predisposition to longer life is huge. In worms, there's a gene called age1, and little worms that have a lot of this live 10 times longer than the worms that don't. So there's a big genetic component too.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you for all of that. So what happens, I guess, from a biological perspective as we humans age, since we are part of a species that ages?
Yeah, well, I'm really glad you asked me that, because I just happen to have here my list of the 9 basic hallmarks of aging. In 2013, a bunch of European scientists published a landmark paper showing detailing the 9 basic cellular and molecular events, processes that happen that are the hallmarks of aging. And I'll just tell you what they are. They are genomic instability, telomere attrition, epigenetic alterations, loss of proteostasis, deregulated nutrient sensing, mitochondrial dysfunction, cellular senescence, stem cell exhaustion, and altered intercellular communication. Now, can you repeat that, please?
No, I failed.
And there's a lot of interesting research on all of this. One of my favorite studies, if I could just
Yes.
little on a little bit. In Sweden, researchers took a bunch of guys, pretty healthy guys, and volunteers, and took muscle biopsies from both their legs, and then asked them to exercise in the gym on exercise bikes. And then they did that for 45 minutes, 3 or 4 times a week for 3 or 4 months. Then the researchers took more muscle biopsies. But the trick was they got the guys to only use one leg on the exercise bike. The other leg was just kind of flat on the floor. And the pattern of changes molecularly in the exercise leg was much different than in the non-exercise leg. In essence, the exercise leg was physiologically younger than the other leg. And what was actually different was something called DNA methylation, which is complicated jargon, but it just means a little chemical thing called a methyl group latches on to the DNA at various points in the chromosome. And the more DNA methylation you have in general, the older you are molecularly. So the exercise with the one leg had a different DNA methylation pattern from the leg that didn't get exercise, and the exercise leg was molecularly younger. So it's pretty cool.
That
like
is
a
cool.
perfect experiment. Same body, same food, same sleep, same everything. Just one leg got exercise and one didn't.
Right. That's a great
Pretty
study.
dramatic, yeah.
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 Yeah, that's awesome. So, what other, like, I know there were the 9 hallmarks. Is there any of the other ones that you could kind of touch on,
Yeah.
also?
My favorite one, well, there's a couple, but my favorite one is mitochondrial dysfunction. I think probably your listeners know, but just in case, all of our cells have little organelles, little baby things inside them called mitochondria. And they're the powerhouses of the cell. They literally, in these little factories, they take the food that we eat and the oxygen from the air and put them together in a chemical way. And the net result is an energy molecule called ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And it's a very efficient process. One molecule of glucose yields like 30 molecules of ATP. But as we get older, our mitochondria kind of poop out. The cool thing is exercise restores these mitochondria. It actually mass produces these mitochondria. So it's a really cool way to literally make yourself younger. And it's been shown in rats and mice and people. It's very cool and very clear. Exercise triggers the formation in the body of more mitochondria.
Excellent. Yes. Awesome. So what else about exercise? This is your main topic. So how is it that exercise can help improve our lifespan, quality of life, all that kind of stuff?
My two favorite chapters in the book are both on the brain. One is on cognition, which is, thinking, memory, intellectual processing. The other is on mood. And it turns out that exercise triggers inside the brain the production of a chemical that sometimes scientists call miracle grow for the brain. The technical term is BDNF, which stands for brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which just means a chemical made in the brain that acts on nerves in the brain, and in this case makes them grow. This BDNF, this miracle grow, gets triggered in the brain. The chemical goes to the part of the brain called the hippocampus, which is like the memory center, and it literally causes new nerve cells to grow in the hippocampus. And it turns out, this was fascinating to me, that this same chemical, BDNF, this miracle grow, also has a huge effect on mood. It seems to work in tandem with a chemical that we have heard about, most of us, serotonin. They're kind of like a pair of chemicals to improve mood. And the data is just overwhelming for both cognition and for mood, that exercise at a biochemical level is doing good things for both.
Beautiful. I love
Yeah,
that.
it is. It's very motivating.
It is. I am my undergrad is actually, we were talking about this before we hopped on the call, that I went to University of Colorado Boulder, and that my undergrad was exercise physiology. So I have been a long lover of exercise and all things exercise. And it's fun to not only experience the physical benefits in our body and being passionate about moving, but then also hearing all of these statistics and data on how beneficial it can be for us. So beautiful.
I was wondering why you didn't look too confused.
Yes, adenosine triphosphate. Got it. Totally got it.
Exactly.
So I guess what else? Exercise benefits. It seems like, this has been around for a long time. We've been talking about this for a long time. Is that your experience, that we've known about these benefits for a long time, or?
Well, it's funny. It's sort of, we know it so intuitively now. We think, oh, this has always been known. But it hasn't actually in a really scientific way. It was back in the 50s, a guy you might have heard of in one of your classes, a British epidemiologist named Jeremy Morris, did a very cool study. Do you remember that one?
Yeah, Jeremy Morris.
Of London bus drivers with those double-decker buses, conductors and bus drivers, and studied a lot of physiological factors, including their heart function. And the conductors, who were literally running up and down stairs, up and down the double-decker buses and along the aisles to get the tickets from people, their heart function was way better than the drivers who just sat there all day. And that was one of the first studies to show so convincingly that exercise, it has a powerful effect on the heart. And
Mhm.
one of the reasons exercise extends the lifespan and the health span is because it is so powerful for the heart. I mean, the data are unequivocal how many good things exercise does for the heart. Your blood vessels, your cardiac output, your blood pressure. I mean, on and on and on. It's very good.
So, like, how much exercise does one have to do in order to reap these benefits?
Not that much, luckily. But the problem is most Americans aren't doing it. But the government has recommendations of 150 minutes a week. That's not that much. If you translate it, it's about 30 minutes a day for 5 days. You don't even have to do the whole 30 minutes at the same time.
Mhm.
And they're talking moderate activity. This is not running a marathon. This is just exercising to the point where you can talk, but you can't sing. You're a little bit out of breath, but not so out of breath that you couldn't sing opera or something. It's very doable. And, it's a puzzle to me why more people don't do it. But it's our sedentary Western lifestyle that is really, they say sitting is the new smoking, and it's really true. I have
Mhm.
a whole chapter called Sitting Kills. Our lives are built around sitting at work. Here we are, we're
I
sitting.
know, right? I want to stand up. I'm like, oh, I better move. Right? Like,
um, and whether you're at a computer or in front of your TV, it's really, it's seductive to sit all day. In
mhm.
fact, there was one study in 2014 of almost 250,000 American adults, and even people probably like you and like me who exercise 7 hours a week. That's about an hour a day. Um, if they sit 7 hours a day, they still are at a higher risk of heart disease from all that sitting.
Mm.
So you have to keep moving. You have to get up every hour or so, go get a drink of water, go to the bathroom, go
Mhm.
unload the dishwasher, whatever.
Mhm.
It's very seductive to stay sitting, but it's very bad for a number of reasons.
Yeah, it's funny. My partner Ike knows me so well because he got me a right. I have a little like portable stair stepper that's literally right to the right of my computer here, so that I can get up and I can be like on the like on the stairs over. And right, the elliptical is over in that room, and then of course we beach walk all the time and bike and stuff. But I guess like so. Here's another question that I always try to anticipate what people are thinking. Right, so is there too much exercise,
Ah,
right? Like, is there, right? We only need really not that much in order to reap these benefits for our longevity and our quality of life. But what about overdoing it? What's that like?
basically, you can't. I mean, with
Excellent. Woo!
with a little asterisk. I
Yeah.
mean, obviously, if one of your listeners or any of your listeners, have a heart problem, or they think they might, or they've got some orthopedic problem, common sense, check with your doctor. But there have been a number of studies where people even do 10 times the recommended level of exercise with no harm.
Mhm.
um, I mean, it's true that marathoners sometimes have like minor heart changes. Those are usually transient, they usually go away. The number of deaths, if sudden deaths during intense exercise, are vanishingly small. They're not zero. I mean, at some point, exercise might be harmful. And obviously, if you're jumping out of planes or doing something intrinsically dangerous, that's not really exercise.
Right.
That's stupidity. But I mean, there are probably some very good parachute jumpers. But basically, it's not something the opposite is what you should worry about, not doing enough.
Mhm.
But obviously, check with your doctor if you're worried about something.
Absolutely. So going back to the heart and exercise, because it's so beneficial, like what physiologically actually happens when we are exercising that heart muscle, like to our blood vessels and just our circulation, like what's happening?
Well, one of the things that happens with exercise is it dampens down chronic inflammation. And chronic inflammation, I mean, this is not like cutting your finger and it swells all red and hot. That's temporary. Chronic inflammation is all over your body, sort of low level. It's sort of like having the flu a little bit or something. And that underlies a lot of problems, including atherosclerosis, which is the buildup of junk basically in your blood vessels. Um, and so exercise, in part by reducing inflammation, helps a lot with that. And just the fact of doing exercise, including, we should probably touch on high intensity interval exercise, that's very good for making the heart stronger, able to pump out more blood with every beat. and also a factor called heart rate variability, which kind of it means your heart can sort of adjust to the different demands being put on it with a little more nimbleness. So all those things are good. And also partly, since we're talking about inflammation, the other reason cutting down, reducing chronic inflammation is important is that inflammation underlies diabetes. And that is a huge problem in the country, and it's often linked to heart disease. I had one doctor tell me that they consider anyone who has diabetes the equivalent in terms of heart risk to someone who's already had a heart attack. So the beauty of exercise is it integrates everything. All these systems are connected in the body. And exercise kind of addresses all of them for the same 20 minutes you're on the bike or something.
Right. Oh, the beauty. Well, clearly both of us love exercise. Yeah, it's very obvious. So for people who don't love exercise,
yes.
I know you're watching, I know you're listening, I know someone out there is not a big fan. So what recommendations do you have for people to get started, to find something they love doing, something that is going to, be sustainable for them? What do you suggest?
Yeah, that's a great question. And one of my favorite exercise physiologists, I asked him, so what's the best exercise? And his answer was the one that you'll do. The one that you like or can talk yourself into liking. And if it's walking, that's sort of the go-to thing for a lot of people. It doesn't have to be running. It can be dancing. It can be, I don't know, just going mall walking. Don't stop in the stores and buy things, but just keep walking. And one thing that helps is for people to do it in groups. Like if you make a date to go walking at 9:00 in the morning with somebody else, it sort of gets you there because you don't want to let that person down. So kind of making a commitment to somebody else can really help too.
Yes. Yes. That accountability.
That's right. That's right. So just getting started. In fact, one of the studies showed very clearly that just getting out of the least fit category gives you many of the benefits. You don't have to be at the top of the heap. Just getting off the bottom of the heap helps.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah, no. So you don't all have to become triathletes in order to, reap these amazing benefits. So what about the brain? Let's talk a little bit more about that. What are some more benefits of exercise as it relates to the brain?
Yeah, people always think that these kind of brain games or train your brain things are key. It's actually exercise that keeps you young. The data on this are a medical writer's dream. It all lines up in a very powerful way. People who are fit are much less likely to get dementia. In fact, there was a study from Canada that showed if everybody who is currently not active became active, 1 in 7 cases of Alzheimer's could be erased, could be eliminated. In fact, exercise is the #1 modifiable risk factor for Alzheimer's. It means it's the #1 thing you can do to maximize your chances of not getting Alzheimer's. I'm sure everyone listening said, well, I know someone who didn't exercise, who exercised a ton and got Alzheimer's anyway. There are people like that, but statistically, if you exercise, you're less likely to get Alzheimer's. And if you exercise in the early stages of Alzheimer's, you can slow down how fast the disease is progressing. So it's very, very powerful. And it's as powerful in terms of mood too. They've done this with rats, and there's various tests for showing when a rat is depressed, believe it or not. And for people too, in terms of preventing depression and in terms of treating. There are a number of studies that show that exercise, and in these studies, they're mainly talking aerobic exercise, not more gentle stuff like yoga, that aerobic exercise can be as effective as medication for depression. And there's a good synergistic effect. If you do both, it can really be effective. Plus, there's the whole I'm a good person effect from exercise. You can tell yourself, well, I did that today. Maybe that's the only thing I did today for myself, but at least I did that. There's kind of extra Benny of doing that.
Yeah, it's very empowering to climb that mountain or ride that bike at the gym or whatever you're doing. It is very empowering. It feels like, I think there's a level of self-esteem that it breeds also.
Yeah, I don't know about studies of self-esteem, but I believe it.
Yeah, me too. So what about like memory just in general, like cognition and memory? Obviously there's Alzheimer's and dementia, but what about just the average person who maybe never gets dementia or Alzheimer's? Are there benefits to your memory?
Oh yeah, they do tests of how people can figure something out, various tests, neuropsych tests, and people do better with exercise. Sometimes even before and after the test. It's maybe it's all partly blood flow to the brain, also this BDNF. I mean, it's just and people subjectively notice that. They're sharper if they're sort of falling asleep over a textbook or something. If they get up and take a run or a walk, they often come back refreshed for a while, at least.
Absolutely. Oh, I love it. So here's another question, just based on, I know that you've also done work with pain. So for the people watching right now, we've actually recently done an event about overcoming chronic pain. So probably a lot of the people who participated in that event are watching on this event. So what about people who have a lot of pain? Like what suggestions might you have for them in the world of getting exercise?
Yes, you're right. My first book was called A Nation in Pain, and people can still get that on Amazon too if they want. And in that book, I also had a whole chapter on exercise. And it has a powerful effect on pain. Pain is actually, as I'm sure you know, it's very complex. Chronic pain tends to affect women more than men. And biochemically, a lot more is known sort of in the lab than gets translated to patients. And pain is people get very stigmatized by pain, which drives me crazy. And people are told if they need opioids for pain that they're criminals and they shouldn't be doing it. It's a nuanced thing, but exercise really can help pain. If whatever body part hurts, I mean, if you have a broken leg, you obviously don't exercise on that leg, but you find other things to do. Like if your legs don't work and you can afford to go to a gym, they have these arm bike things. You can just crank away on that. Or you basically can move whatever body part still moves. And in my own life, I exercise enough that I do get injured occasionally. I call it injury juggling. I mean, just exercise whatever doesn't hurt. I mean, but just exercise something. I mean, even people who have really serious physical disabilities can do a lot. I mean, one of the most exciting things for me is to watch the Paralympics, people in wheelchairs. I mean, they have not been defeated by their pain or paralysis. And there's a woman on my swim team who really can't use her legs, but she competes in the Paralympic events and in the regular meets. I mean, sort of trying not to be defeated by pain with the knowledge that pain is not your fault. And I just feel very strongly that people blame themselves and other people blame them and dismiss them for their pain. And that drives me crazy because it's not your fault. Sorry for the rant.
No, I like it. That's good. Awesome. I love this. This has been so much fun. And I just love your passion and enthusiasm for this. And I hope everyone feels that same passion and enthusiasm and gets out and, does something to get moving or do more of what you're already doing. And so let's talk a little bit about your book. Everybody, there is a button below this video that links over to Judy's book. So tell us about it.
It's called Exercise is Medicine. I had fun writing it, and I hope you have fun reading it. It's structured in a way that it's very accessible, and the heavy-duty science is kind of at the end of each chapter, so you don't have to plow into that if you don't want to, but if you do, it's right there. And of course, the science is what it's all about. It's not just sort of, I believe in exercise. Science is not a matter of belief. The evidence is really there. And if you want to look up the studies, I have a lot of citations at the end of the book. But for readers, it's very accessible.
Awesome.
And I have a whole chapter on sort of take-home messages and a Q&A for people for the most common questions. I also have a chapter on exercise drugs and anti-aging drugs. And I'm not recommending these, but they're out there and people are experimenting with them. And some of them have actual scientific rationales that are reasonable, but there's a big caveat. I mean, most of these are not approved by the FDA, and they're kind of experimental, so be very cautious.
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. Well, again, everyone, there's a button below. You can click right through on that and go and get your copy of Judy's book. Are there any last insights? Anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up?
Just do it.
Right. Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been awesome. I really appreciate you and your work and for taking the time to talk with us today.
That was really fun. Thank you.
Certainly was. And everyone watching and listening right now, thank you so much for showing up for yourself, for showing up for yourself in this journey of healthy aging and adding exercise into what you do. And we will see you again next time.